"Don't get your cleaning spray on her dress, Maid." The words snapped like a whip, loud enough to turn a few heads in the old church. Maya Williams paused mid-motion, her hand still gently adjusting a lavender bouquet tied to the edge of the altar. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the sting of humiliation rising in her throat. She didn't turn around, not yet. She'd learned to breathe through these moments, like a soldier walking through landmines of condescension. "Why is someone that dirty even here?" Another bridesmaid sneered, her voice sharp as glass. "Did the janitor's closet explode or something?" Laughter. Maya kept her eyes focused on her hands. She tugged the last bow taut on the pew end. The floral arrangement, lavender and garden roses, trembled slightly in her fingers. She whispered under her breath, not in prayer but in self-control. She'd heard it all before. At another event, a man had asked if she was with catering or with the cleaning crew. At another, a woman said, "Oh, I didn't know they hired local youth to help with these events. It's so generous." But here today, she wasn't just an afterthought. She was the joke. "Lauren's going to lose it if she sees the help standing near the altar," someone muttered behind her. Maya turned, this time locking eyes. The bridesmaids, all dressed in blush pink, shimmered like ornaments. They looked at her the way one might look at a stain on an expensive dress, something unsightly, unfortunate, but not worth cleaning. One of them raised her phone, snapped a photo, and smirked. "She's gonna love this," the girl whispered. Caption: "When the hired help wants to be in the wedding photos too." Maya's cheeks burned, but she didn't respond. She knew better than to feed fire with fire. Instead, she straightened, adjusted the strap of her canvas bag on her shoulder, and walked away, her posture straight despite the weight that grew heavier on her back with every step. No one cared that she had graduated top of her high school class. No one knew she'd started college on scholarship before dropping out to care for her ill grandmother. To them, she was a maid, a background character in their picture-perfect day, a punchline. She made her way to the back of the church, into the prep room that smelled of eucalyptus, candles, and leftover resentment. It was quiet here, at least, peaceful, the place where she could breathe. Sitting down on a crate of reserved wreaths, Maya rubbed her temples. Her chest felt tight, not from sadness but from the pressure of keeping everything inside. She pulled her wallet from her back pocket, opened it, and slid out a folded photo. A man in uniform, tall, proud, dark-skinned, smiled back at her. He held a baby wrapped in hospital white. The baby was her. James Walker, staff sergeant, her father. Gone. Not dead, not officially, but long missing. One deployment too many. Then silence. She'd written letters, left voicemails. She never stopped hoping. But hope gets expensive when rent is due. She whispered aloud to no one, "I'm still here, Daddy." Knock, knock. Startled, she shoved the photo back into her wallet and wiped her face quickly. "Maya Williams?" a voice called gently. She opened the door to see a gray-haired man with a camera. He adjusted his glasses and offered a warm smile. "You probably don't remember me," he said. "Raymond Hughes. I used to cover education news for the Savannah Press." Maya tilted her head, wary but curious. "You won the Georgia State Essay Contest, didn't you? Back in 2016? Wrote about your grandmother's story during the Civil Rights Movement." She blinked. "That was a long time ago." "It was unforgettable," he said. "You wrote, 'Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through those who keep walking.' I clipped that line. Still have it." A smile tried to rise but couldn't quite get there. "Didn't you get a scholarship to Spelman?" he asked. Maya hesitated. "I did. I left. Family came first." Raymond nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you're still writing, even if it's with flowers now." She chuckled once, dryly. "Flowers don't talk back. They don't fight back either," he replied softly. "But maybe you still do." Before she could respond, he touched her arm briefly and left. She stood in the silence a long moment, then took out her phone. New notification. Image received. She tapped it open. There it was, a photo snapped by the bridesmaids. Maya bent over the flower arrangement. In the background, they posed, smirking. Caption: "Even the maid wants to be in the wedding album." Her hand shook slightly as she powered off the screen. This was no longer just cruelty, it was sport. A knock again, softer. "Excuse me, dear." An elderly white woman in a wheelchair sat outside the door, wearing pearls and a navy shawl, Her hands rested gently on her lap, skin spotted with age but dignified. "I need help finding the side entrance," she said. Maya rose, immediately gentle. "Of course, Mom." As they moved slowly down the corridor, the woman looked up at her. "What's your name?" "Maya." "Maya Williams." The woman blinked. "Walker's daughter?" Maya froze. "Yes," she said slowly. "You knew my father?" The woman smiled wistfully. "He saved my life." Mogadishu, 94. I was a Red Cross nurse. He carried me out of a collapsing building. I've never forgotten those eyes. Maya swallowed the lump in her throat. "I didn't think anyone remembered him," she whispered. The woman squeezed her hand. "Courage like his? It leaves a mark." She glanced down at Maya's skin, not judgmentally, but with reverence. People like to mock what they fear, especially when it shines. Maya felt her eyes sting. "You don't need their permission to belong," the woman said. "Some legacies grow in silence. Yours is loud, even when you whisper." Duh. The wedding bells rang in the distance, but Maya heard something louder inside her, the sound of her soul standing up. The wedding bells faded into soft organ music as Maya wheeled the elderly woman whose name, she learned, was Mrs. Eleanor Grant, into the sunlit vestibule. The old woman's presence felt like an echo from another time. Graceful. Anchored. A quiet reminder that dignity didn't come with a price tag or a skin tone. "Thank you, dear," Eleanor said, her hand lingering briefly on Maya's. "If only more people saw you the way your father did, with pride, not pity." Maya smiled politely. But her heart wasn't calm. It was swelling unevenly with things she hadn't let herself feel in years. Anger. Grief. A flicker of defiance. She helped Eleanor settle near the front row, next to a family friend. As Maya turned to leave, Eleanor caught her wrist gently and whispered, "Sometimes, God places you in the room not to be silent but to see who's watching, and who needs to be watched." Maya nodded once, then retreated down the side aisle, the soft soles of her shoes soundless on the polished floor. Backstage in the prep area, the laughter resumed. "Did you see her face when we took that picture?" One of the bridesmaids giggled. "Priceless," said another. "I swear, if she so much as breathes near the cake table, I'm calling security." Maya didn't enter. She stood on the other side of the thin wall, listening. She's probably just here to get free food. Like, seriously, who let her into the ceremony room in the first place? I heard she used to be smart or something, like some scholarship story, but look at her now. Classic case of wasted potential. They didn't even know her, but that was the point, they didn't want to. She turned away from the door, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it all. These weren't children. These were grown women, some even younger than her, dressed in designer gowns, armed with iPhones and fake smiles, carving her down with words like razors. She wanted to scream. She wanted to yell that she had every right to be here, that her father had bled for this country, that her grandmother had marched in Selma, that her people had built the roads they now drove on without thinking. But she said nothing. Again. Instead, she took her phone out and opened her email. The last message from her father sent 7 years ago was still pinned to the top. A simple sentence. "Never let them teach you to bow when you were born standing." She inhaled sharply and stepped outside, blinking against the late morning light that spilled onto the stone steps of the church. Fresh air, deep breaths, a moment of stillness. "Maya?" She turned. It was Raymond Hughes, the photographer. "I need your help," he said, adjusting his camera strap. "We're missing someone to hold the lighting panel for the next set of pre-ceremony shots. I hate asking, but the intern bailed." Maya nodded. "Shure." He smiled, grateful. "You're the only one who doesn't look like she'll melt in sunlight." She followed him around to the side garden where the groom's party was gathering. The contrast was startling, laughing men in tailored suits, whiskey flasks tucked into coat pockets, a relaxed air of privilege floating around them like cologne. Raymond positioned the panel and handed Maya the stand. As he stepped back with his camera, one of the groomsmen leaned toward another and muttered under his breath, "Wow, they've got her doing slave work now." Maya froze. The other man chuckled. "Hey, at least they gave her something to hold this time that isn't a mop." She looked straight ahead, jaw tight, knuckles white on the panel grip. Raymond heard it. His finger hesitated on the shutter. For a moment, he looked like he might say something, but then, nothing. He lifted the camera, and the sound of the shutter replaced the silence. Click, click, click. Later, when the group dispersed for drinks, Raymond walked over to Maya. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "They think this is all a show. They don't know you." Maya nodded but didn't speak. Because even when people heard the cruelty, they rarely stopped it. "You handled it with grace," he added. "Grace," she murmured. "Or exhaustion." He didn't reply. Back inside, the final prep began. Guests filled the pews, and the music turned grand. Maya stood near the back of the sanctuary, behind a velvet curtain, out of sight but not out of range. From the bride's dressing room came high-pitched squeals of excitement. 3 minutes, someone shouted. Maya stepped forward to deliver the bride's bouquet. As she entered the room, Lauren the bride glanced at her reflection, then at Maya, then at her reflection again. "I didn't ask for this," she said coldly. Maya held out the bouquet anyway. "I just work for the florist," she said. Lauren snatched the bouquet, examined it like it was beneath her. "Next time, send someone who doesn't look like they just walked off a city bus," Lauren said, without even turning around. "If you feel that Maya is someone worth your compassion, give her a like, and don't forget to leave a comment with your location, because you might be surprised to find others nearby watching this story along with you." The room fell silent. Even the makeup artist stopped mid-blend. Maya stood there, heart racing, then turned and left. She walked fast, past the vestibule, past the guests, past the soft organ music rising again. Outside, she sat on the church steps, breathing hard. Inside, someone announced the bride. Maya didn't move. "Thought you might be out here." She turned. Eleanor was wheeling herself down the ramp. Maya stood, hurried to help. Eleanor looked up at her. "You don't belong in the back," she said firmly. "You were born to be seen." Maya smiled weakly. "Some days it feels like I was born to be ignored." Eleanor placed a hand on hers. "Then maybe today, the world needs to be reminded." Inside, the doors opened wide, and the music swelled. Maya didn't know it yet, but within the hour, something would happen that would silence every voice that laughed at her. Because justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes, it walks in wearing a uniform. Inside Street Mary's, the music rose like a wave, then fell into reverent silence as the double doors swung wide. The congregation stood, phones lifted, heads turned, and Lauren, the bride, stepped forward, radiant in silk and lace, bouquet in hand, the one Maya had placed into her grip moments earlier. Maya watched from behind a column near the back. She wasn't supposed to be in the sanctuary anymore, but something held her there. Not defiance, not bitterness. Just resolve. She had a right to witness this moment, to see it through, to be more than the shadow in the corner of someone else's story. The bride began her slow procession down the aisle. The bridesmaids followed, their smiles now perfectly staged, their cruelty tucked neatly behind curled lashes and pearl earrings. Maya's eyes wandered across the pews. Familiar Savannah faces were seated row after row, local politicians, judges, business owners, people who wore kindness like perfume, for show. She'd cleaned their offices, delivered flowers to their wives. They didn't see her then either, but one figure caught her attention. In the very last pew, on the far left side, sat a man in a dark green military jacket. His posture was straight, his head bowed slightly, as if in prayer. But Maya could see the sharp line of his jaw, the gray at his temples, the unmistakable strength in his frame. He raised his eyes, just for a moment. Their gazes locked. Her breath caught. He looked familiar, deeply, painfully. Could it be? No, impossible. That hope had been buried too long. And yet, Maya stepped slowly down the aisle's edge, careful not to draw attention. The ceremony continued, vows being exchanged, the officiant's voice reverent, the bride's smile glowing under the vaulted ceiling. But Maya couldn't hear a word. The man stood, quietly, intentionally, and began walking down the side aisle. Several heads turned, confused by the movement. Even the organist paused for a beat. Maya stood frozen. The man stopped halfway down, turned toward the altar, and spoke in a voice that wasn't loud but carried with stunning authority. "I need this ceremony to pause." Gasps rippled across the room. The officiant stammered, "Excuse me, sir, this is a private ceremony." The man stepped forward another few feet. "My name is Major James Walker, retired United States Army, and I cannot allow this wedding to continue without addressing a grave injustice happening right now, in this church." Maya's knees nearly gave out. Murmurs erupted. Lauren, the bride, turned sharply. "What the hell is going on?" The groom stepped protectively in front of her, confused but defiant. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are. I know exactly who I am," James said, his eyes now locked on Maya, "and I know who she island." Then, he pointed directly at Maya, standing stunned at the rear. "She is Maya Williams, the daughter of a soldier, the granddaughter of a civil rights marcher, the woman who was mocked, humiliated, and degraded by guests at this wedding, and still showed up with grace." Maya couldn't move. The room fell silent, dead silent. James took another step forward, voice unwavering. "I've spent my life in war zones. I've seen men fall in the dirt with their last words being about their daughters, their wives, their mothers, and I've seen men like some of you born into comfort use that comfort like a weapon against those who work quietly in the shadows." He turned his gaze to the bridesmaids. "I watched 3 women this morning treat Maya like she was trash. I heard a man in a suit laugh about slave work. I heard your bride call my daughter dirty." Lauren's mouth opened, then shut. "She's your daughter?" someone whispered in disbelief. James nodded once. "I never stopped looking for her. I never stopped loving her. But I had no idea until 10 minutes ago that she would be in this place, enduring this cruelty." Raymond, the photographer, lowered his camera. No one was snapping pictures now. The officiant finally found his voice. "Sir, I understand your pain, but this is not the time." "No," James said. "This is exactly the time." He turned toward the crowd. "How many of you saw her? Knew she was being mocked? And said nothing? You want to celebrate love in this room? Then you better start by recognizing human love, the kind that demands we stand up for the voiceless." Eleanor, from the front row, slowly clapped once. Then again. A few more people followed. The clapping grew, uncertain at first but then firm. Lauren stood stunned, bouquet trembling in her hands. James stepped aside, finally allowing the moment to breathe. Maya moved, as if in a dream, down the aisle. She stopped in front of him. "Daddy?" she whispered. He nodded, voice thick. "I'm sorry I was gone." She threw her arms around him, sobbing now. Not from sadness, from release. "I waited," she choked. "I waited so long. I'm here now," he whispered, "and I see you." Behind them, no one knew what to do. The wedding paused, but something greater began. Not a love story in lace and roses, but a resurrection, a reckoning. Maya stepped back, wiping her tears, turning to face the guests. "I didn't come here to make a scene," she said, voice trembling but clear. "I came here to do a job, to be invisible, because that's what this world trains girls like me to do." She took a deep breath. "But I'm not invisible, and I won't apologize for existing in your pictures, in your spaces, in your silence." Her eyes found the bridesmaids, now ghost pale. "To the women who laughed at me, thank you. You reminded me that grace under fire is not weakness, it's power." Maya turned to Lauren, whose face had gone stony. "I hope your marriage lasts longer than your kindness today. Because if this is how you treat strangers, I can only imagine how you love your own." The room was stunned. No applause this time. Just truth settling like dust after a storm. James placed a hand on Maya's back. She leaned into it, steady now. They walked out together, not as shadows, but as a father and daughter whole again. And outside, the sun didn't shine brighter, but it felt warmer. Outside the church, Maya stood beside her father in the shade of an old magnolia tree, its wide branches arching like arms offering shelter. The sunlight dappled through the leaves, dancing across the white stone steps where they had just made their unexpected exit. The cool September breeze rolled through Savannah like a sigh after a long-held breath. Neither of them spoke at first. James looked older than she remembered. His once black hair was streaked with gray now, his eyes lined with time and distance. But the firmness in his voice, The stillness in his posture, it was all the same. He had always been larger than life in her memories. And now, here he was, flesh and blood, standing next to her after years of silence. Maya stared at him. Her emotions tangled gratitude, confusion, disbelief. "I thought you were dead," she finally said. He turned slowly, pain visible in his expression. "For a long time, I didn't know if I was alive either." There it was, the crack in the armor. He went on, voice low, steady. "We were taken off grid. Somalia, then Yemen. By the time they pulled us out, everything had changed. My records were lost, scrambled. I tried to reach out letters, emails, but I guess they never got through. And when I finally made it back stateside, I didn't know where to start. Your grandmother had passed and you were trying to survive," Maya said quietly. He nodded, and they stood there for a moment. Two lives diverged, and now miraculously crossing again. From the corner of her eye, Maya noticed guests trickling out of the church in awkward silence, their pastel dresses and tailored suits now slightly disheveled, their faces flushed with uncertainty. The wedding had not resumed. The ceremony, as it was planned, was over. A few guests whispered. Some glanced her way no longer with smirks, but with something resembling shame. Maya looked away. She didn't need their pity. She'd learned to live without their approval. James cleared his throat. "You were incredible in there. You stood your ground." Maya gave a faint smile. "I think I shocked myself." "That wasn't shock. That was legacy." She looked up at him, her eyes softening. "You taught me that, didn't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Just then, a voice called out behind them. "Miss Williams." They turned to see Raymond Hughes, the photographer, hurrying toward them. He held his camera to his chest, his eyes wide and unsure. I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "and I'm sorry for not saying something sooner." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "You heard everything." "I did. And you didn't speak." "I was afraid of making it worse, of ruining the moment." James stepped forward, not unkindly. "Sometimes, silence is the worst kind of participation." Raymond nodded slowly. "You're right. I've been behind the lens so long, I forgot what it's like to stand in the frame." He held out a small photo. "I printed this during the commotion. I don't know if you'll want it, but it felt important." Maya took the photo. It was of her and her father. Right in the moment she had whispered, "Daddy," and wrapped her arms around him. Her face was streaked with tears. His hand rested on her shoulder like a tree root, grounding them both. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. "Thank you," she said, slipping the photo into her bag. Raymond hesitated. "If you ever decide to tell your story beyond today, I'd be honored to help." Maya smiled faintly. "We'll see." As he walked away, Eleanor Grant rolled toward them in her wheelchair, guided by a young nurse. Her pearls glistened in the sunday. "My goodness," she said. "I've seen courtrooms less tense than that church just now." James chuckled softly. "Ma'am, you were the first one to clap." "Well, someone had to," she replied. "If I could have stood up, I would have done that too." Eleanor reached out and took Maya's hand. "You stood taller than the steeple today, child." Maya looked down, overwhelmed again. "I didn't expect any of this," she admitted. "No one does," Eleanor said. "But when the moment comes, some of us rise. Others sink. You didn't just rise, you lifted others with you." She squeezed Maya's hand, then turned to James. "And you, Major Walker, don't you dare disappear again. Savannah's a city of ghosts. We don't need one more." James offered a humble nod. "Yes, ma'am." After Eleanor rolled away, the breeze picked up again. Maya turned to her father. "Where do we go from here?" He looked thoughtful, then gestured toward the old cemetery across the street. "You want to take a walk?" She hesitated, then nodded. They crossed slowly, their footsteps crunching the gravel path. Tall oaks draped in Spanish moss shaded the headstones, many of them centuries old, names etched in stone, stories forgotten. James pointed to one. "This was my great-grandfather, Mason Walker. He was born a slave, died free. He worked as a blacksmith right over on Congress Street." Maya crouched, running her fingers gently over the stone. "He was buried in a corner lot. Because the main section wouldn't allow black folks, James said, but he was the strongest man anyone knew. She stood. You always told me I come from a line of fighters. You do, he said, and I failed you when I disappeared, but I won't fail you again. Maya didn't say anything. She just reached out and took his hand. For now, that was enough. In the distance, the church bell rang once more, not for ceremony, but for time. A signal that life was moving again. And this time, Maya Williams was no longer walking alone. That evening, the city of Savannah seemed quieter than usual. The air held the faint scent of magnolia and salt water, and the old cobblestone streets glistened slightly from a recent drizzle, as if the sky itself had been watching and needed to weep in silence. Maya sat on the creaking porch swing of her grandmother's house, a small, weathered home tucked between two large oaks, draped in Spanish moss. She hadn't been here in weeks. Work had kept her on the move, arranging flowers and surviving. The house was simple, worn, but it had roots, and tonight, so did she. Inside, the floorboards groaned under heavy steps. Her father was making tea just as her grandmother used to. A strange, aching nostalgia filled her chest. She remembered being 5, sitting on that same swing. Her grandmother braiding her hair and humming old spirituals, while the world felt far away and soft. Now, life had hardened her, but the melody in her memory hadn't left. The screen door creaked open, and James stepped out, carrying 2 chipped mugs. Chamomile, he said, handing her one. It's all I found in that dusty cabinet. Maya took it with a small smile. Grams used to say chamomile was God's way of saying you've done enough for today. James chuckled, sitting beside her on the swing. Then I'd say you've more than earned it. They sipped in silence, listening to the wind rustling the trees. Across the street, a neighbor's porch light flickered on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I didn't expect to find you in a place like that today, James said finally. Maya looked down at her mug. Neither did I. I was supposed to drop flowers and leave. Simple job. But they made you the center of the storm, he finished. No, she corrected gently. They tried. But I decided not to stay in the background. James nodded, pride glowing faintly in his eyes. That moment in the church. You carried yourself like someone who's been fighting all her life. I have, she said quietly. He turned to her, and I wasn't there for most of it. Maya looked at him, measuring the weight of those words. There was pain in them, but no excuses. That mattered. I used to ask myself what I'd say if I saw you again, she admitted. I rehearsed it. I was angry. I wanted answers. But when I saw you today, all I wanted was for it to be true. James's throat tightened. He set his mug down. I've made peace with the past in pieces, he said. Piece by piece, day by day. But this, seeing you, it reminded me there's still work to do. And not just with you. Maya tilted her head. What do you mean? He leaned back on the swing, the wood groaning under his frame. The way they treated you, it wasn't just ignorance. It was comfort. They're comfortable with the world bending around them. With silence. Savannah's like that, Maya said. Smiles in public, knives in whispers. James's eyes narrowed slightly. Then it's time we stopped whispering. She studied him. You planning something? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded brochure. He handed it to her. The Southern Echo Project. Historical Truth and Reconciliation Through Community Action. What is this? She asked. It's a nonprofit I've been consulting for, he said. They map and archive personal histories of Black families in the South, veterans, freedom fighters, unsung names. They're building a digital museum. I wanted to nominate your grandmother last year, but I didn't have access to the family records. Maya ran her fingers over the brochure. You want her story in this? I want your story in it too, he said. What you did today, that belongs in history, Maya. You're not just my daughter. You're part of a lineage that deserves to be remembered. She felt a lump rising in her throat. I never thought anyone saw me that way, she whispered. James placed a hand over hers. It's time more people did. They sat in silence, the swing swaying gently beneath them. Across the yard, The wind chimes rang a soft melody, familiar, distant, comforting. Maya stared into the night. I don't know if I'm ready to be anyone's symbol. You don't have to be a symbol, he said. Just be seen. That's where it starts. She nodded slowly. After a pause, she looked at him again. Did you really mean it, back at the church, when you said I was your daughter? He smiled. I meant every word. And I'll say it again, every day, until the world forgets how to look down on you. She let out a quiet laugh, tears welling behind her eyes. I missed you, she said. I missed us, he replied. And for the first time in years, Maya let herself lean her head against his shoulder. The night air wrapped around them like a blanket stitched from old wounds and new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew low and slow, as if calling them forward. Tomorrow, James said softly, I want to take you somewhere. Where? To the base. To meet some people who remember who I was, and need to meet who you've become. Maya nodded. Okay. The stars blinked to life above them, ancient and indifferent. But down below, on a porch in Savannah, 2 generations began again. Not as strangers bound by blood, but as survivors bound by truth. The next morning broke soft and golden, filtering through the lace curtains in Maya's childhood room. Dust floated in the light like memories slow, quiet, almost holy. She hadn't slept much. Her mind was still running laps around the events of the day before. Her father was alive. The wedding had turned into something no one could have predicted. And today, she would step onto a military base not as a child watching her father deploy but as a woman walking beside him. She dressed in jeans and a navy button-up, the closest thing to respectable in her small wardrobe. Her hair was tied back, her expression steady. But inside, she carried a dozen questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. At exactly 8 a.m., James stood waiting outside in a pressed khaki shirt and slacks. No medals, no ceremony, just presence. He looked like a man who'd spent decades waiting to say the right things, and now understood the importance of simply showing up. The drive to Fort McAllister was quiet at first. Spanish moss swayed above the road like veils of the past. Maya glanced out the window, trying to gather the nerves that had scattered like marbles in her chest. You okay? James asked, one hand steady on the wheel. I'm not sure, she admitted. I didn't think I'd ever come back to a place like this. Places can change, he said, or they can remind us of who we were before the world told us who to be. They pulled up to the main gate where 2 guards stood at attention. As James rolled down the window, one of the guards, a young black man, squinted at him. Major Walker? He asked, incredulous. Sir, welcome back. James offered a small salute. At ease, Corporal. The gate swung open, and they drove through. Maya watched the familiar landscape roll by training fields, rows of barracks, the tall flagpole waving strong in the Georgia wind. It all looked the same, but she felt entirely different. They parked near a low brick building. A bronze plaque read, Veterans Hall, dedicated to service and sacrifice. Inside, the air was cool and still. Portraits of past officers lined the walls, and Maya saw her father's face among them, young, upright, eyes full of defiance. James walked ahead and greeted a stout woman with salt and pepper hair standing near the reception desk. Sergeant Major Coleman, he said. She turned, then gasped. James Walker, you stubborn son of a gun. I thought you were a ghost. They embraced tightly. Coleman's voice was gravel and fire. If I'd known you were coming, I'd have baked a peach cobbler, or at least warned the rookies. James laughed. Still scaring lieutenants, I see. She looked at Maya. And who's this beautiful woman? Don't tell me this is little Maya. Maya hesitated. That's me, though the little part's long gone. Coleman studied her, then nodded approvingly. Your grandma used to march into our mess hall like she owned the place. We all knew not to cross her. And you've got that same fire in your eyes. Maya smiled shyly. It felt good to be remembered not as a servant or background noise, but as someone born from strength. They walked into a meeting room, where a few veterans sat in worn leather chairs, sipping black coffee and telling half-true war stories. James introduced her quietly. This is Maya, my daughter. Every head turned. A tall man in a wheelchair wheeled forward. We thought you were lost, Major. I was, James said, but not anymore. Maya looked around. There was no pity in these faces, only reverence. respect that had been earned through things she didn't yet understand. Coleman gestured toward a wall lined with memorabilia. We keep records of every soldier who passed through this base. But we're also building out the new Echoes Project stories behind the uniforms, families, struggles, truths they didn't put in the paperwork. James looked at Maya. This is where you come in. She blinked. Me? He nodded. You're a writer, a truth teller. You've seen injustice with your own eyes. These stories need your voice. Not from a safe distance, but from the front lines of memory. Maya looked at the walls, at the photographs and medals, at the worn boots in glass cases. What if I'm not strong enough? She whispered. Coleman stepped forward. Honey, strength isn't about not breaking. It's about showing up with your cracks and still saying, I'm here. Oh, Maya felt something shift in her chest. Later, as she sat at a small table with a laptop Coleman lent her, she began typing. My name is Maya Williams, and for most of my life, I believed I was invisible, until one day, a room full of polished faces tried to erase me and I decided to stay standing. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Behind her, James quietly watched. You've got more to say than you think, he said. She nodded. And maybe, it's time to say it loud. The click of the keys filled the space. Outside, recruits shouted through drills. Inside, a woman reclaimed her voice. And in that hall of echoes, the story of Maya Williams, daughter of a soldier, granddaughter of a marcher, survivor of silence, had just begun to be told. By the time Maya closed the laptop, the veterans' hall had thinned out. Most of the old soldiers had returned to their routines, doctor's appointments, rehab sessions, or just the long ride home to empty porches. The room had gone quiet, but Maya could still feel the hum in her fingertips, the electricity that comes when truth is finally given room to breathe. James returned from the hallway with 2 sandwiches and a pair of sodas. Didn't want to interrupt the writer at work, he said, placing the food down. But I figured you can't write on an empty stomach. Maya smiled. You remember I like turkey and mustard? I remember everything I missed, he replied, eyes soft. They ate in silence for a while, occasionally glancing at the photos on the wall, uniformed faces, smiling or stoic, caught forever in the amber of military history. Maya chewed slowly, trying to organize the thoughts swirling in her head. Dad, she said suddenly, do you think people can really change? I mean, deep down. James wiped his mouth and leaned back. Some people? Yes. Others, they just get better at hiding who they are. Maya exhaled. That wedding, those people, none of them saw what they were doing as wrong. To them, it was just normal. Jokes, looks, whispers. He nodded, because their worlds never held a mirror that showed the truth. Until you. She hesitated. What about the ones who said nothing? Who saw, but stayed quiet? James's eyes grew darker, heavier. Those are the ones I think about most. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. When I was deployed overseas, we trained locals in crisis zones, civilians who wanted to fight back, protect their own. And you'd always find 2 types of people. The ones who stood up when things got bad, and the ones who disappeared into the walls, thinking silence would keep them safe. But silence doesn't keep anyone safe. It just delays the danger. Maya thought of Raymond, the photographer, of the quiet guests at the wedding, of the bridesmaids who never said a word after that cruel laughter. What happens to them? She asked. The ones who don't speak up? Sometimes they wake up. Sometimes they don't. He looked at her, but their silence never erases your voice. A deep knock echoed through the hall. James stood, opening the door. To their surprise, it was Raymond. He looked out of place without his camera, just a man in jeans and a wrinkled dress shirt, holding something in his hand. Hi, he said, voice tentative. I know this is unexpected. James gave a small nod. You're welcome here. Raymond stepped in slowly, then turned to Maya. I've been thinking about that day non-stop, he said. The church, the photos, what I didn't say. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maya stood slowly. Okay, I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I brought this. He held out a folder. Inside were several printed photos, black and white, raw, unedited. Maya, flipping through them, saw moments she hadn't noticed. Her standing in the sun behind the curtain, half-shadowed. Her father, mid-speech, face carved with fire. Eleanor clapping, alone in the front pew. And finally, Maya head high, eyes locked on the room, defiant and radiant all at once. "I know I was silent," Raymond said, "but I'd like to offer something that speaks." Maya looked at the images again. They weren't perfect. Some were grainy, some unfocused. But they were honest. "I want to help you tell your story," he said, "with your permission." Maya studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" He looked down. "Because for the first time, I realized I had a platform. And I've been using it to play it safe. Take pretty pictures. Avoid messy truths. But the world doesn't need pretty. It needs real." James watched quietly, nodding approvingly. Maya finally spoke. "Okay, but on my terms." "Of course," Raymond said quickly. "I want control of the narrative. No edits without me. No headlines that turn me into a tragedy." Raymond straightened. "You're not a tragedy, Maya. You're a warning. And a promise." She took the folder. "We'll see what the world does with that." They shook hands. For the first time, it felt like something balanced was being built not out of guilt, but from truth. After Raymond left, James turned to her. "You handled that well." "I'm learning," she said, still figuring out where to put all the fire. He chuckled. "Let it burn the right things." Later that afternoon, they visited her grandmother's grave. The cemetery was quiet, framed by old oak trees and filled with the hush of wind through branches. Maya knelt before the headstone and traced the letters. Evelyn Williams, 1929, 2014. Truth, like light, refuses to hide. James stood behind her, his hands folded respectfully. Maya whispered, "I wish she could see this. Me, you." "She does," James replied. "She always did." They stood together for a long while. No words, just memory. When they returned to the car, Maya felt different. Not lighter, not healed, but anchored. As they drove back into the city, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in fire and gold. "We've got work to do," Maya said suddenly. James glanced at her. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "We tell every story," she said. "Not just mine. Every woman who's been made to feel small. Every man who's had to shout just to be heard. Every family with a legacy no one bothered to ask about." He nodded. "The world's listening now." And as Savannah rolled past their windows, familiar, old, complicated Maya Williams sat taller than she had in years. Because this time, the silence belonged to someone else, and her voice was just getting started. 3 days after their visit to Fort McAllister, Maya found herself walking up the marble steps of Savannah's City Hall. The air was thick with late summer humidity, but Maya's resolve cut through it like steel. In her hand, she held a small leather-bound notebook, pages filled with handwritten names. Quotes. Stories. Stories of veterans, maids, janitors, shopkeepers. Invisible lives made visible through a voice that no longer trembled. James had stayed behind that morning. He didn't need to be in every room. This was Maya's step to take. The grand double doors swung open as she entered, her shoes clicking against the polished floor. The receptionist barely looked up. Another black woman in slacks and sensible flats, no threat, no urgency. But Maya didn't come for permission. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where the mayor's community liaison office was tucked between zoning and transportation. The hallway smelled like fresh paint and bureaucracy. At the door, she knocked twice, then stepped in. A young white assistant in a crisp blue blouse looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Maya said calmly. "I have an appointment with Councilman Reed." The assistant's eyebrows knit together. "He's in a closed meeting. I called last week, left messages, sent emails. I never heard back, so I decided to show up." Before the assistant could protest, the door to the back office opened. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out, thinning hair combed neatly, skin pale from years behind desks and podiums. Councilman Reed. He looked surprised to see Maya. "Miss Williams?" "That's me," she replied. He gestured stiffly. "I have 5 minutes." Maya walked past the assistant and entered his office without waiting. The room was well decorated but impersonal. Diplomas, family portraits, a framed newspaper article from his first election. Maya sat down before he offered. Reed followed and took his seat, folding his hands. I assume this is about the incident at the Wilmington wedding? Maya tilted her head. You were there. He hesitated. My wife is Lauren's cousin. I didn't see what happened directly. Of course you didn't. His jaw tensed. I've heard there was some misunderstanding. She opened her notebook. Misunderstanding is a word people like to use when the truth is inconvenient. He said nothing. I came here because I have a list, she continued. Not just names. Stories. Of people like me. People like my grandmother. People who've been stepped over, dismissed, spoken to like ghosts in their own neighborhoods. He shifted. Miss Williams, I understand your frustration, but… No, Councilman, she interrupted. You don't. You understand damage control. You understand donor optics. But what you don't understand is what it feels like to be humiliated in a room full of people who claim to believe in justice, in faith, in community, then sit on their hands while someone tears your dignity apart. His face flushed slightly, but he didn't argue. I'm proposing an initiative, she said. Community testimony forums. Monthly gatherings where working-class residents, especially black women, can speak openly about how they're treated in city spaces, churches, offices, weddings, anywhere. And I want it recorded, public record. Reed scoffed lightly. That sounds like an invitation for chaos. It's an invitation for truth, she replied, which, I imagine, feels like chaos to those who've never had to face it. He leaned back, eyes narrowed. And you expect City Council to fund this? No, she said plainly. I expect you to champion it. And if you won't, I'll go public. I'll go to the press. I'll hold a forum myself in front of City Hall every Friday with a microphone and folding chairs. You're threatening me? I'm informing you. There's a difference. For a long moment, Reed didn't speak. Then he sighed. I'll take it to the board. No promises. Good, Maya said, rising. Because I'm not asking for promises. I'm building pressure. She left before he could respond. Back on the street, the sunlight felt sharper, the air heavier, but Maya walked like a woman who no longer had to ask for space. That evening, Maya returned to the house to find James sitting at the kitchen table, reading a folder with thick-rimmed glasses balanced on his nose. He looked up when she walked in. Well? He asked. She slid her notebook onto the table. He heard me. I don't know if he listened, but he heard me. James nodded slowly. That's where it starts. She sat across from him. I'm tired. You should be. He closed the folder and reached across the table. But I'm proud. You're building something. You know that? I'm trying. He chuckled. Trying is doing. The people who laughed at you, they're not laughing now. Maya looked at him, expression soft. I don't want revenge. I just want reckoning. Something that lingers longer than anger. James leaned back. Then you're on the right path. They sat quietly, the hum of the old refrigerator buzzing in the background. Maya broke the silence. Do you ever wish you'd done something different? Like, left the army earlier? Stayed home? James thought for a moment. Sometimes. But then I remember everywhere I've been. Everything I've done, it brought me here. To this table. To you. Maya smiled. That's dangerously close to sentimentality. He grinned. I'm retired. I'm allowed to be soft. She reached for the folder he had been reading. It was filled with names, dates, transcripts, part of the Echoes Project archive. At the bottom of the pile was a worn photo, a woman in a Sunday dress, fist raised high, mouth open mid-chant. Her eyes burned with purpose. Is that Grandma Evelyn? Maya asked. James nodded. 1963, Selma. Maya stared at the photo. She would have loved this moment. She built this moment, James said. You're just the voice now, the echo that finally gets heard. Outside, the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Savannah, throwing long shadows across the porch. But inside, light remained. Strong, steady, because behind every closed door, a new one was being forced open, and Maya Williams had the key in her hand. The first community testimony forum was held in the basement of the Mount Zion Baptist Church, under the soft glow of antique pendant lights and the faint creak of wooden pews above. It wasn't glamorous. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and history, but it was theirs. Maya stood at the front of the room, facing a semicircle of metal chairs. No stage, no microphone, just a folding table, a notepad, and her name written in chalk on a small welcome board. For a moment, she wondered if anyone would come, if anyone cared enough to sit and speak. Then the door opened. First came Mrs. Hightower, a retired schoolteacher with a cane and the kind of voice that once hushed entire classrooms. She nodded at Maya without a word and sat down in the front row. Then came Josiah, a garbage collector who always wore his union hat like a crown. Then a young nurse, a librarian, a mechanic. By 6:15, every chair was filled and still more people stood near the walls, holding styrofoam cups of coffee and waiting, watching. James stood in the back, arms crossed, quiet and steady. Maya took a breath. "Thank you all for being here." A few heads nodded. A couple murmured, "Mm-hmm. I started this forum because too many stories die in silence." We've all seen things lived, things that deserved more than a shrug or a joke or a turned back. And today, we begin naming those things. She paused, scanning the room. This space isn't about politics. It's about truth. Your truth. There was a beat of hesitation. Then Mrs. Hightower raised her hand. "I'll go first." Maya nodded. The old woman stood slowly, leaning on her cane. Her eyes were sharp, her voice clear. "In 1971, I taught at Fairview Middle School, first black teacher they'd ever hired. And the first week I was there, someone left a noose made of shoelaces in my desk drawer. A collective hush fell across the room. I told the principal. You know what he said? Probably just a prank. Don't take it personal." She chuckled bitterly. "I taught there for 33 more years, never got an apology, but I stayed. Because I knew if I left, they'd never hire another one of us again." There was silence, then soft applause. Josiah stood next. 2 years ago, a woman in a gated community called the cops on me because I was walking too slowly down her street. I was collecting garbage, on duty, wearing my uniform. The cop came anyway. The stories poured out like old rain, heavy, overdue, cleansing. A teenage girl shared how her guidance counselor had discouraged her from applying to certain colleges, saying she should be realistic. A middle-aged man admitted he stopped correcting people when they mispronounced his name because it just wasn't worth the sigh. An elderly woman whispered how she still crossed to the other side of the street when she saw white men in suits, not out of fear, but memory. Maya took notes as fast as she could, but her pen couldn't match the rhythm of the room. It wasn't just testimony. It was unburdening. It was resurrection. After 2 hours, the forum began to slow. People lingered, reluctant to leave. Eyes glistened. Shoulders sat lower. Truth had been spoken aloud, and it hung in the air like incense. James stepped forward and handed Maya a thermos of tea. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she replied. She looked around the room, at the worn tiles and dented chairs, and saw something sacred. This wasn't a headline. It wasn't a viral video. It was healing. That night, Maya sat at her desk at home, rereading the notes. She felt both exhilarated and exhausted. As she flipped to a fresh page, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, southern, familiar. "Maya Williams?" "Yes. This is Judge Clayton Prescott. I was at the Wilmington wedding." She froze. The judge cleared his throat. "I've thought about that day ever since. About what I saw. About what I didn't do." Maya said nothing. "I didn't laugh," he added. "But I didn't stop them either. And I suppose, at my age, silence isn't defensible anymore." Maya leaned back, her heartbeat steady. "Why are you calling?" "I've been on the bench 25 years. I'm stepping down next spring. But before I do, I want to support your forums. Officially. Publicly." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Why now?" He paused. "Because when you stood in that church, you reminded me of someone. My grandmother. She cleaned white homes her whole life. Spoke only when spoken to. I spent most of my career trying to erase the parts of me that looked like her. You made me remember them." Maya swallowed hard. "I can't promise I'll always say the right thing," he continued. but I can promise to stop being one of the ones who whispers your name in guilt instead of pride." She exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Judge. Call me Clay," he said, "and let me know when your next Forum Island. I want to be there." After the call ended, Maya sat in silence. Not all change was loud. Some of it whispered. Some knocked quietly on the door after hours, carrying names and apologies. She turned back to her notebook and wrote, "When truth is spoken, even the ones who once turned away begin to turn back." She looked out the window. The moon hung low, silver and wide, and somewhere beneath its light, a city was beginning to stir one voice at a time. Maya stood in front of a long walnut conference table, her fingers brushing the soft edge of the notepad in her hand. Around her sat 8 members of the Savannah City Council, including Councilman Reed. At the far end, flanked by aides and assistants, sat the mayor, a tall woman in her early 60s with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that gave nothing away. This was not a community forum in a church basement. This was politics. And politics had teeth. The room was quiet, air-conditioned and sterile. A pitcher of water sat sweating on a silver tray. No one had touched it. Maya cleared her throat. 2 weeks ago, over 40 people gathered in the basement of Mount Zion Baptist Church, she began. Most of them had never spoken in public before. Many were older. Some had carried their stories for decades. And in that room, for the first time, they were heard. She let the silence hang before continuing. "What I'm asking for isn't charity. It isn't a grant to make people feel good. It's infrastructure for truth. A space, officially recognized by this council, where citizens can testify on record about discrimination, humiliation, and neglect." A man in a gray suit raised an eyebrow. "You want us to fund a storytelling circle?" Maya smiled politely. "I'm asking for the city to acknowledge that the stories of its citizens matter. That the pain of the past and present doesn't disappear just because it makes people uncomfortable." Another council member leaned forward. "And what would this achieve? What's the end game here?" Maya steadied herself. "Trust, reconciliation, policy changes. This is how movements begin. Quietly, persistently, one testimony at a time." The mayor finally spoke. Her voice was clear, calm, and precise. "Miss Williams, what happened to you at the Wilmington wedding was deeply regrettable, but one incident does not necessarily call for systemic solutions." Maya's spine stiffened. "I agree," she said. "One incident doesn't. But I'm not here because of one incident. I'm here because I'm the result of hundreds. Because every story shared at the forum echoed mine. Because we've made a culture out of swallowing shame in silence, and I'm not doing that anymore." Councilman Reed cleared his throat. "If I may, I believe Miss Williams has a point." Heads turned. She's not just speaking for herself. She's speaking for a portion of our city that rarely gets invited into these chambers unless it's election season. "May?" The mayor raised an eyebrow. "Are you proposing a vote?" "I am," Reed said, voice steadier now. "I move to approve the pilot funding for the Community Testimony Forum's 6 months, limited budget, oversight included." Silence, then murmurs. A second motion. A vote was called. Hands went up, 5 in favor, 3 against. The mayor hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. Motion passes. Maya exhaled slowly, her heart beat loud in her ears. Reed leaned toward her and whispered, "You earned this. Make it count." Later that evening, back at the house, James grilled chicken on the backyard barbecue while Maya sat nearby, barefoot in the grass, her phone buzzing with messages. Reporters were calling. Local activists. A professor from the university asking if he could sit in on the next forum. She put the phone down and stared at the sky, where clouds gathered in slow procession. James turned to skewer. "You realize you've just become very popular." Maya laughed. "For now. Give them a week. People move on." He looked over. "And you?" "I'm not moving on. I'm moving forward." He nodded approvingly. After dinner, they sat on the porch with sweet tea, the kind her grandmother used to make with too much sugar and a slice of lemon. James tilted his glass toward her. To shaking the table, Maya clinked her glass against his. "To building a new one." She paused. "You know what's strange? I always thought justice looked like a courtroom. A gavel. A headline. But now I think it looks more like a folding chair in a church basement. A voice trembling as it learns to steady. People clapping for a story they'd been too afraid to tell themselves. James smiled. Justice wears a lot of faces. You just found the one that fits you best. The next day, Maya met with Raymond at a local cafe. He carried a thick envelope filled with printed photos, storyboards, and a proposal. I've been thinking, he said as they Saturday. Your forums shouldn't just be local. They should travel. City to city. Town to town. Maya blinked. That's ambitious. He grinned. That's the point. He handed her a mock-up. The Echoes Tour. America's Untold Stories. Maya flipped through it. Names, faces, maps. It's just an idea, he said. But if you say yes, I'll help produce the whole thing. Podcast, video, photos, every format we can. She closed the envelope and met his gaze. I like it, she said, but only if the people telling their stories stay in control. Agreed, Raymond nodded. No edits without permission. Full transparency. The people come first. Maya extended her hand. They shook on it. Outside, the city pulsed with new energy. Maya felt it under her skin, in her bones. A shift. Small, maybe, but permanent. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Because once the unheard begin to speak, the world never sounds the same again. 3 weeks later, just as Maya was preparing to host the second Community Testimony Forum under official city sponsorship, the storm arrived, not one made of wind and rain, but of headlines, whispers, and resistance dressed in business casual. It began with a phone call from Raymond. They're trying to shut it down, he said, his voice tense. Maya sat upright on her grandmother's old couch, phone pressed tight to her ear. Who is? Some city officials, anonymous for now. I got a leaked memo. They're calling the forums socially destabilizing, saying it's a misuse of municipal funds. Maya stood, pacing. Destabilizing? We've had 2 meetings. There were prayer circles and coffee. One woman brought banana bread. They're scared, Raymond said, and when people get scared, they start rewriting the story. Man. Maya hung up and immediately dialed Councilman Reed. He picked up after the second ring. Miss Williams. Councilman, I need to know if what I just heard is true. A pause. Then a tired sigh. Yes. There's a motion being pushed quietly through the Budget Oversight Committee. They're trying to freeze your funding before the 3rd forum happens. Her voice sharpened. On what grounds? On the grounds that your forums are attracting attention from activists, some of whom have controversial histories. That's all they need. A little fear. A little fire. She could feel it now, that slow burn in her chest. Not panic, not defeat. Purpose. When's the vote? She asked. Thursday morning. Closed door. Not anymore, Maya said. That night, she wrote a post that would go viral within hours. With a single photo of the community circle arms linked, voices shared, she captioned it. They called our healing dangerous. We call it necessary. Let the city hear us. Thursday, 9 a.m. Be there. By sunrise, the post had been shared over 12,000 times. Thursday arrived gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over Savannah's historic district. But the streets around City Hall were anything but quiet. A growing crowd formed on the steps, elders in Sunday best, students with backpacks and signs, veterans in faded uniforms. Some held hand-lettered posters that read, "We are the truth you ignored." Others simply stood in silence. James stood near the edge of the steps, arms crossed, flanked by 2 men from his old unit who had flown in from Alabama just to stand beside him. Maya arrived dressed in all black jeans, blazer, no frills, her hair pulled back in a low twist. Beside her was Eleanor, unexpected, but resolute. I needed to be here, Eleanor had said that morning. I didn't laugh, but I didn't stand up for you either. It's time I did. Reporters gathered, microphones hovered. Maya took the podium the community had brought themselves. No city funding. No approval. Just an old music stand. And a Bluetooth speaker. They want to label this a disruption, she began. But this is a reminder. She gestured to the crowd. We are the ones who watched our mothers carry trays and clean floors. The ones who learned to keep our heads down to stay safe. But silence was never safety. It was erasure. The crowd murmured in agreement. They say we're stirring up division. But we are not the ones who built the walls, we're just refusing to pretend they aren't there. Applause broke out. Cheers followed. Inside City Hall, the committee vote was already in session, but outside, the city was listening. Later that afternoon, the decision came down. The motion to freeze the funding failed by 1 vote. Councilman Reed stood before the press, his tie slightly loosened, eyes weary but proud. "This city must be brave enough to listen," he said, "even when the stories make us uncomfortable, especially then." Maya watched from the back of the press room, arms folded. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. That evening, she returned to the Veterans Hall where James waited with Coleman and a few others from the Echoes Project. "Well," Coleman said with a grin, "you sure know how to keep things interesting." "I don't want attention," Maya replied. "I want accountability." "You got both," James said. "Now use them." They sat in a circle as the sun dipped below the windows. Coleman handed Maya an envelope. Inside were letters from the last forum participants. Handwritten, raw. One read, "I've lived 82 years and never felt brave until last Thursday. Thank you." Maya folded the letter gently, her throat tight. "You're not just collecting stories," Coleman said. "You're lighting fuses." Maya nodded, then let it burn. She stood, turning to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, and somewhere in that golden hush of twilight, she realized something. They weren't just building a movement. They were becoming one, and Maya Williams, once silenced, once mocked, was now the voice at the gate, the spark in the dark, and the echo that refused to fade. The Savannah sun had barely climbed over the rooftops when Maya walked through the doors of Pinehurst High School. The halls smelled like floor polish and distant adolescence, the kind that still lingered in lockers and posters about anti-bullying campaigns. This wasn't part of the plan. Not yet. But a call from a teacher had changed that. Her heels clicked steadily down the hall toward room 108, where Mrs. Jasmine Coleman, a literature teacher and longtime friend of her grandmother, waited by the door with folded arms and a worried face. "I didn't know who else to call," Jasmine said quietly. "She's smart, Maya. Really smart. But they've been tearing her down for months. Quietly. Relentlessly." Maya stepped into the classroom and saw her. A young black girl sat at a desk near the window, her hands folded tight on her lap. She couldn't have been older than 15. Her name was Aaliyah, bright eyes, dark skin, and a look that hovered somewhere between defiance and exhaustion. Maya approached slowly, crouching next to her. "Hi, Aaliyah." "I'm Maya. I know who you are," the girl said without looking at her. "You're the lady who made all those people mad." Maya smiled gently. "I suppose that's one way to put it." Aaliyah didn't smile back. Her voice was flat when she added, "They call me Roach Girl. Behind my back. Sometimes in front of it. Say I smell like welfare. That I don't belong in honors English. And I guess, maybe I don't." "Why would you think that?" Aaliyah shrugged. "Because I walk into a room and everything goes quiet. Because I raise my hand, and the teacher skips over me like I'm not even there. Because I get called aggressive when I defend myself. But when they snap their fingers in my face, it's just kids being kids." Maya exhaled slowly. "I know that silence, Aaliyah. The kind that isn't just quiet, it's deliberate." Aaliyah finally looked at her. "So what do I do?" Maya stood up and walked to the whiteboard. She picked up a marker and wrote 5 words in big, deliberate strokes. "You are not the problem." Then she turned. "They want you to believe your presence is the issue. But your existence is not the problem. Their discomfort with it island." Aaliyah blinked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then how do I survive this?" Maya walked over and pulled out a chair, sitting eye level with her again. "You speak. You write. You gather people who see you. You don't fight fire with fire, you fight it with mirrors. Hold up the truth and let them see what they've become." Aaliyah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Will you come back? Talk to more girls like me." Maya reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "Every time you need me." That night, Maya sat at the kitchen table with the same notebook she'd carried since the first forum. Its pages were worn now, corners curled, the ink smudged from tears and rain and too many hands flipping through truth. James entered the kitchen carrying a package. This came for you. Maya opened it slowly. Inside was a small framed photograph. It was from Raymond, a shot from the protest at City Hall. Maya, standing in front of the crowd, her hand mid-gesture, mouth open. Behind her, a sea of people, black, white, old, young, all leaning forward, listening. There was a note attached. You look like a storm, and they listened like crops begging for rain. She smiled. Her phone buzzed. Another message. This time, from a woman in Charleston, then Atlanta, then Birmingham. They were starting their own testimony forums. Echoes spreading. She opened her laptop and created a new document. Echoes, a national guide to community testimony circles. The first sentence came easily. This is not a movement you lead, it's one you unlock in others. 2 days later, Maya found herself at a dinner hosted by the mayor, an uncomfortable blend of performative civility and political maneuvering, but she showed up anyway. Eleanor joined her, and together they walked into the event dressed not for compliance, but for command head high, eyes forward. The room quieted slightly when they entered. The mayor approached them with a tight smile. "Miss Williams," she said, voice cordial, "quite the stir you've caused." "I prefer to call it a reckoning," Maya replied smoothly. The mayor's smile didn't waver. "You've shifted some conversations. I respect that. But you must understand there are limits, even to good intentions." Maya sipped her water, then said calmly, "The problem isn't the intention, it's the comfort people refuse to let go of. Justice doesn't fit neatly on linen napkins and donor tables." There was a long pause. Then the mayor's eyes softened just slightly. "I underestimated you." Maya didn't blink. Most people do. That's how we survive long enough to surprise them. Later, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the Savannah River, Eleanor turned to Maya. "Do you ever wonder what your grandmother would say?" Maya looked out over the water, where the moon shimmered like a quiet sentinel. "She'd say, 'Stop asking what I'd say and keep doing what I couldn't.'" Oh, they stood there for a long time, letting the wind braid through their silence, because it wasn't about one forum, or one girl, or even one city. It was about the shift, the undeniable, irreversible shift, when voices too long ignored finally take up space, hold their ground, and remind the world that the mirror doesn't lie. And Maya Williams was that mirror now, unbreakable, unapologetic, and everywhere. The file landed on Maya's desk at exactly 9:12 a.m. No envelope, no sender. Just a manila folder slid under the community center's back door with a yellow sticky note that read, "For her eyes only." She stared at it for a full minute before touching it. Instinct hummed. James, who was fixing the broken coffee machine in the hallway, noticed the tension in her shoulders. "What is it?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. "Not sure," Maya said, "but it doesn't feel random." She peeled open the folder and began flipping through its contents. Names, addresses, internal memos, photos. She froze. Page after page of city officials, business owners, and school board members linked by complaints formal and informal, related to racial discrimination, abuse of power, and systemic neglect. Each file had one common note stamped across the top: "Yoon investigated." James walked over slowly, looking over her shoulder. "That's a list," he muttered. "Not just a list," Maya said. "It's the list. The one they swore didn't exist. The one people hinted at, whispered about. Someone's been keeping track, and they want us to know." James frowned. "Or they want to use us." Maya nodded slowly. "Either way, they're handing me a match and pointing at the powder keg." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she read every file, every line, cross-checked every detail. Names she recognized from the wedding, from the mayor's fundraiser, from the school board that overlooked Aaliyah. Quiet power, insulated and protected for decades. This wasn't just a truth-telling mission anymore. It was accountability with teeth. 3 days later, Maya stood in front of a packed room at the Savannah Civic Hall, rented last minute through community donations after the original venue suddenly became unavailable due to maintenance. The microphone buzzed gently. Rows of folding chairs creaked under the weight of anticipation. News cameras lined the back wall. Raymond had set up a live stream. Viewers from across the country tuned in. Number echoes unveiled trended before Maya even said a word. She stepped up, holding the folder. "I didn't ask for this," she began. "But history has a funny way of finding its way into your hands, especially when it no longer wants to be hidden." She held up the file. "These are stories, patterns, warnings, not rumors, not exaggerations, documented truths that were shelved, dismissed, or deliberately buried. Until now." "No." A murmur rippled through the audience. "Tonight, I won't name all the people on this list. Not yet, because this isn't about vengeance. It's about the community deciding how justice should look, what it should feel like." Maya set the folder on the table next to her and opened a fresh notebook. "Instead, I want to begin with testimony." She looked at the first row. "Miss Anita Jackson, would you come up?" A petite woman in her 60s slowly stood, adjusting her church hat, and made her way to the front. Her voice trembled at first, but strengthened with every word. "I worked at the Westfield Library for 28 years, she began. "Cleaned floors, organized shelves, managed late returns. They called me Sweet Anita. Until the day I asked why my white coworker, who started after me, was made supervisor. That day, my hours were cut. My locker was emptied, and when I filed a complaint, it vanished. Just like my job." Gasps, nods, clenched jaws. Maya didn't move. She just let the silence do what it always did reveal. The next speaker came forward, then another, and another. Each story peeled back the polite veneer Savannah had worn for decades, and somewhere near the back, Judge Prescott watched with a grim face. When Maya caught his eye, he nodded once subtle, but firm. This wasn't just Maya's forum anymore. It was a tribunal, a reckoning on folding chairs. After the event, Maya stepped outside for air. The night was warm, buzzing with crickets and camera flashes. A young reporter followed her out. "Miss Williams," he said breathlessly, "are you planning to release the full list?" She looked at him. "Would you?" The reporter blinked. "Every name has a family," she continued. "Every mistake has weight. This isn't about setting fires. It's about holding torches high enough for people to see themselves clearly, then decide what to do about it." "So, what comes next?" Maya smiled faintly. "We let the community speak. Let them decide which truths need light, and which wounds need hands, not headlines." He scribbled something, then lowered his pad. "You think change is really possible? This deep?" She looked out over the street, where neighbors still stood in clumps, talking softly, hugging one another. "I don't think," she said. "I know. Because I've seen what silence costs. And this is louder than they ever expected." That night, back at the house, James handed her a fresh cup of tea and set a candle on the table, her grandmother's favorite scent, cinnamon and cedarwood. "You did good tonight," he said. Maya took the cup but didn't drink. "I feel like we just crossed a line." James nodded. "You did. But sometimes, justice lives on the other side of the line." She opened the folder again, flipping to the last page. It was blank except for a handwritten message. "She needs to know. We all do. No name, no initials." But Maya didn't need one. The echo had a sender. And somewhere, behind closed doors, someone who once whispered had finally chosen to shout. Maya leaned back, the candlelight flickering across her notebook. She didn't write. Not yet. This chapter didn't need words. It needed witnesses. It started with a shuttered bakery, then a vandalized mural. Then, one morning, James's truck had its tires slashed 2 clean slices like warnings whispered through steel. None of it made the news. No statements. No arrests. But Maya knew what it was. The backlash had arrived. She stood at the edge of the community center parking lot, staring at the red spray paint across the side of the building. 3 words in jagged letters. "Go back home." Home. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Looks like we rattled the wrong cages." James muttered beside her, arms crossed. He didn't look angry, just tired. Tired in a way that came from years of seeing too many moments like this fade into silence. Maya pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, not for social media, not for attention, for memory, for truth. "We're not backing down," she said. "If they want us to stop, they'll have to write bigger letters." Inside, The community center buzzed with quiet fury. Volunteers cleaned up broken glass. Eleanor comforted a nervous new speaker. Raymond sat with a group of college students, organizing notes for the upcoming Echoes tour. Maya gathered everyone into the main hall. "I want to make something clear," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "This," she gestured toward the window, still bearing shards from the broken pane, "is not the end of our work. It's proof we're on the right road." A woman in the back raised her hand. "What if it gets worse?" "It might," Maya answered. But so did history before it bent. So did every movement that asked more from the world than it was ready to give. James stepped forward. "We aren't just preserving stories anymore. We're protecting them, and the people who carry them." Maya nodded. "And we will continue, but we'll do it smarter." They formed a committee that night: security, outreach, legal support. One of the forum's earliest participants, Darnell, a retired detective, volunteered to oversee safety protocols. "I've dealt with cowards before," he said. "This is just a new mask on an old face." The movement evolved. It became leaner, sharper. Every session now had off-duty officers posted at entrances, those who believed in the cause. The Echoes tour's launch was moved up. They'd begin in Atlanta, then Charleston, then Baltimore. One city at a time. And Maya, she was no longer just leading. She was learning to shield. 1 week later, a stranger walked into the center. He was in his late 40s, pale-skinned, wiry. He wore a faded military jacket and kept his cap low. "I'm looking for Maya Williams," he said, his voice rough with hesitation. Maya approached cautiously. "That's me." He extended a hand, but his eyes never quite met hers. "My name's Frank Monroe. I used to work for the city archives. Before they made me leave." Why are you here?" Frank pulled out a small thumb drive and placed it on the table between them. "I saw your speech, the one about the list. What you're doing, it's bigger than you think, bigger than Savannah." Maya picked up the drive. "What's on this?" "Records. Documents. Correspondence between city officials across 3 states. Coordinating policies that, well, let's just say they've worked hard to keep certain communities quiet. For decades." Maya's breath caught. "Why now?" He shrugged. "Because I kept watching people like you carry this weight alone, and I realized silence was killing me." She stared at the drive. "Why me?" Frank finally looked up. "Because you didn't just demand change. You made space for it. And now you need protection from the rot beneath the floorboards." That night, Maya and James sat in the study, the only light coming from the screen of her laptop as the files loaded. She read in silence. Emails from elected officials, coded language, denial strategies, red-line neighborhoods, school board manipulation, evidence, not just whispers anymore. James leaned closer, jaw tight. "This isn't just Savannah." "No," Maya said quietly. "It's a system with roots deeper than we thought." She saved everything to a secure cloud and printed backup files. "I need to speak with Prescott," she said. "He knows this system. He'll know how to navigate it." Now, Judge Prescott met her the next morning at a quiet diner off Route 17. He wore civilian clothes, denim and a flannel shirt, but his posture remained judicial, spine straight, eyes observant. Maya slid the drive across the table. "We're past the city council now." He plugged it into his tablet, brows furrowing as he skimmed. When he looked up, his face had shifted. This is combustible." "Then we light it carefully," Maya replied. "No," he said, voice grave. "You don't light this. You build a firewall around it, and you make sure when it goes public, there's no room for denial." He leaned in. "You're not just a community organizer anymore, Maya. You're a threat to a legacy. That means they'll come harder. Legally, politically, maybe even personally." She nodded. "I'm ready." He gave a half smile. "You've always been ready. They're just finally noticing." As they stood to leave, he handed her a card. "This is the name of a federal attorney I trust. If this grows, you'll need more than local backup." Maya tucked the card into her notebook. The war had changed, but so had she. She wasn't just holding mirrors anymore. She was building bonfires. And this time, the truth wasn't just coming. It was kicking in every door. The letter arrived in a crisp white envelope, delivered not by mail but by hand left on the front steps of the community center. There was no return address, no stamp, just Maya's name written in perfect, looping cursive. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the kind used by law firms and foundations. She unfolded it slowly. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph, then narrowed. A cease and desist order. James walked in just as she dropped the paper on the desk. Bad news? Worse, she said. They're threatening to sue. Defamation, incitement of public unrest, and unauthorized distribution of confidential materials. He picked up the letter and whistled low. They're scared. No. Maja corrected. They're regrouping. This is how institutions defend themselves. Paper first, power second. The lawsuit was filed by a coalition of local officials, some whose names had quietly appeared in the testimony forums, others who had never been mentioned publicly but feared what might come next. It was a preemptive strike, a warning dressed in legalese. Raymond arrived minutes later, laptop in hand. I saw the news alert. It's spreading already. Number silence. The echo is trending. People are furious. Maya looked up. That's their goal. Confuse the narrative, make it seem like we're the aggressors. So what do we do, he asked. We answer. That night, Maya called an emergency meeting at the community center. The room was packed wall-to-wall speakers from past forums, volunteers, clergy, students, veterans. Some were angry, others frightened, but all of them were there because something inside refused to shrink. Maya stood before them, the letter in one hand and her notebook in the other. They want to shut us down, she said, not with fists or fire, with fear, with the kind of silence that looks legal but feels like a muzzle. A hand rose near the back. If we fight this, it'll cost money, time, energy we don't have. I know, Maya nodded, and if we don't fight it, they'll use this as precedent to silence every other circle that tries to rise. No. Reverend Thomas, the oldest speaker in the group, stood up. When they started the Montgomery bus boycott, they didn't have money either. Just feet, fury, and faith. The room murmured in agreement. Aaliyah, now volunteering regularly at the center, stood beside Maya. We're not just telling stories, we're building armor. And maybe it's time they realize that truth doesn't back down just because they sent a lawyer. The decision was unanimous. They would not retreat. Instead, Maya announced a public press conference. The next day, on the courthouse steps, they'd face the silence and speak louder. The morning air was thick with humidity and tension. Maya wore her grandmother's brooch on her lapel, a small silver dove with its wings outstretched. James stood behind her, flanked by Coleman and Raymond. The media showed up in force. So did members of the public, some holding signs that read, "Our voices are not illegal." Others simply stood silently, arms folded, daring the system to look them in the eye. Maya stepped up to the microphone, holding the cease and desist letter high. This is what fear looks like on paper, she said. Not ours, theirs. She let the silence settle before continuing. They call us disruptive, but ask yourself, what are we disrupting? A system that allows complaints to vanish, that rewards silence and punishes memory? She looked out over the crowd. We are not vandals. We are not liars. We are the archives they tried to bury. Applause rose around her. I've been advised not to speak, to let the lawyers handle it. But this movement wasn't born in courtrooms. It was born in kitchens, in pews, in whispered truths passed down, because no one else would listen. She placed the letter on the podium. We will fight this, and we will keep speaking, because justice doesn't come on quiet feet, it arrives with echoes. Might again. That evening, Maya received a message from Judge Prescott. Meet me. Tonight. My chambers. Bring the drive. She arrived after hours, the courthouse dim and echoing like a cathedral after Mass. Prescott opened the door himself. He looked older than usual, more worn. I've read everything, he said, gesturing for her to sit. What you have. It's not just civil. It's criminal. There are officials named in those files who participated in coordinated cover-ups. One case, in particular, housing permits intentionally denied to black veterans. That's federal. Maya's jaw tightened. So what now? Prescott sighed. We open a formal investigation, quietly at first. But if this goes where I think it does, It could reach the state level, maybe higher. He looked at her. But if you go forward, there's no going back. They won't just come for your funding. They'll come for your name, your family. They'll paint you as unstable, radical, dangerous. La, Maya looked him in the eye. They already tried that. Didn't stick. He almost smiled. Then let's move forward. Back at the house, Maya sat on the porch with James, the sounds of cicadas buzzing in the darkness. She held her notebook open, but the page remained blank. James handed her a pen. What are you writing? She shook her head. Not yet. Tonight. I'm just listening. To what? She looked up at the stars. To what the world does when it realizes it can't silence us anymore. The wind rustled through the trees like a choir tuning up, and somewhere in that soft, defiant stillness, Maya knew this was no longer just a fight to preserve voices. It was a war for who got to decide which voices mattered at all. 2 days after the press conference, the door to the community center opened quietly, just after 8 a.m. Maya had just finished sweeping the front entryway, something she still insisted on doing, despite everyone offering to take the chore off her hands. She said it kept her grounded. That morning, it would do more than that. A man entered, late 40s, white, wore a well-tailored jacket, khakis, and a thin silver watch that flashed under the fluorescence. He looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not standing hesitantly in a community center that still smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee and lavender cleaner. Maya looked up. Can I help you? The man removed his cap. I think I should be asking you that. He paused. My name's Andrew Parks. I used to sit on the Savannah Zoning Appeals Board, until 3 years ago. She didn't respond, but her expression sharpened. I saw the drive, the files. My name isn't on them, but I've seen the ones who are. I watched them reassign housing permits, deny licenses, push black-owned businesses out by zoning them into oblivion. Maya studied him. And you let it happen? He swallowed. Yes. At first I didn't know what I was seeing. By the time I did, I was in too deep. I had a family, a mortgage. I told myself I was powerless. But that's the lie we tell ourselves to feel clean. Maya folded her arms. So why now? Because I watched your speech on the courthouse steps, he said. And because I saw what they spray painted on your wall. And because I want my kids to know. I finally did the right thing. Maya motioned for him to sit. Tell me everything. By noon, Andrew had named 5 current officials across different departments: planning, sanitation, licensing, who had coordinated what amounted to quiet economic warfare. Maya recorded the conversation. With his permission, he signed a statement and agreed to testify if it came to that. When he left, Maya sat alone for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. One step forward, a crack in the wall. But a crack was all she needed. That afternoon, she met with Judge Prescott and passed him the signed affidavit. His eyes widened slightly as he read. This is real, he said, and now admissible. Maya leaned forward. We don't need to shame every name, just the right ones, the ones that held the door closed for decades. Prescott nodded. And this is the lever that starts prying it open. Back at the center, Maya called a meeting with the Echoes team. James, Eleanor, Raymond, Aaliyah, and now a growing list of contributors across the state joined via Zoom. The energy in the room was different now. Not just determined, but focused, like a machine clicking into gear. We've always said this was more than storytelling, Maya began. Now it's time to show them just how much more. She wrote a name on the whiteboard. Phase 3, restoration. Raymond raised an eyebrow. Restoration of what? Equity, trust, access, Maya said. We've exposed enough. Now we build. Now we take the data, the testimony, and the names, and we design systems that undo the harm. Eleanor added. And we take this public. Not just speeches. We show charts, histories, financial data receipts. We hold panels. We publish. We document. We make the truth harder to deny than ever. They spent hours drawing timelines, mapping connections, listing survivors of systemic harm. For every name of someone who abused power, they would highlight 5 who had been denied opportunity, voice, or safety. It wasn't just about bringing down the pillars of injustice, it was about replacing them with people who had carried the weight for too long. A week later, Maya stood at the head of a long wooden table in Atlanta's Civic Transparency Summit. She had been invited reluctantly at first. Some feared her presence would cause controversy, but when she walked into the room, even those who doubted her found themselves sitting a little straighter. She began with no fanfare. "I'm not here to shake the table," she said. "I'm here to show you what's underneath it." A screen behind her lit up with a map, red lines marking where businesses had been denied permits, neighborhoods where property taxes mysteriously surged, schools that had their funding redirected. Then, stories. A black woman who lost her salon after a zoning review. A veteran denied housing after returning from Iraq. A family whose property was quietly reclassified, taxed into foreclosure, and bought at auction by a developer who had lunch with a city councilman weekly. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. By the end, 2 panelists had stepped down from their seats and stood beside her. One was a state auditor. The other, a university professor who offered to open a research fellowship dedicated to institutional truth-telling. Later, at the reception, the mayor of Atlanta approached her. "You remind me of Fannie Lou Hamer," he said. "Not because you're loud, but because you're relentless." Maya smiled politely. "We don't need to shout when the ground's already cracking." That night, she sat on a hotel balcony, overlooking the Atlanta skyline. James called, his voice calm but steady. "You were on 3 news stations today," he said, "and the city council just voted to delay 2 permit renewals linked to those names Andrew gave you. Progress." She leaned back, letting the wind tangle her hair. Her grandmother used to say, "Justice moved like honey. Slow, but sticky. Once it touched you, it clung. And now, it was everywhere." Maya looked down at the candle she'd lit on the balcony table. One small flame, flickering steady. Not a blaze, but the beginning of one. And behind her, a nation was beginning to lean in, not toward the noise, but toward the echo that refused to die. The one that sounded a lot like Maya Williams. Savannah hadn't been this quiet in decades. Not in the halls of City Hall, not in the courtrooms, and certainly not on the front pages of its newspapers. But silence wasn't peace, it was pressure. The kind that builds when people start realizing the ground beneath them is shifting, and Maya Williams had become the fault line. On a cloudy Tuesday morning, Judge Prescott summoned Maya to a closed-door meeting in his chambers. The tone of his voice on the phone was measured, but beneath it, she heard urgency. He closed the door gently behind her and gestured for her to sit. "You should know," he said. "The Department of Justice has launched a preliminary inquiry. Your forums, your data, Andrew Parks's testimony. They're paying attention now. Not just listening. Investigating." Maya nodded slowly. "What's their scope?" "Wider than you think," he said. "They're not just looking at Savannah. They're tracing patterns across 3 states, cities where similar zoning rejections and school board shifts took place. They suspect coordination." Maya blinked. "That's a conspiracy." "No," Prescott said. "That's the American playbook." "And you finally held it up to the light." She felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. This was beyond Savannah now. What had started as a forum in a dusty church basement had become the matchstick lighting up an entire corner of the country. Prescott leaned in. "There's a hearing next week. A federal fact. Finding session. They want you to speak. Testify. Under oath." Maya's hands curled around her notebook. "Then I'll tell the truth, loud enough for it to echo." Back at the community center, Maya gathered the team. Raymond sat at the end of the long table, his fingers flying over his keyboard. Aaliyah was there, now a full-time staff member coordinating youth outreach. Eleanor paced gently near the coffee station, stirring her tea without drinking it. "I'll be testifying," Maya said. "Federal level. This isn't symbolic, it's legal. And it's dangerous. If I say the wrong thing, they'll use it to discredit everything we've built." James leaned forward. "Then we make sure they can't. We prepare. We rehearse. We fact-check every name, every timeline, every signature." Aaliyah spoke up. "I want to go with you." Maya looked at her. "You're the reason I'm here," the girl said, "but I want to be the reason someone else shows up next." Maya's throat tightened. She nodded. Then we go together. The night before the hearing, Maya sat alone in the hotel room in D.C., the noise of the Capitol muted by thick walls and tired bones. Her notebook lay open, blank for the first time in weeks. For once, the words didn't come easily. She closed her eyes. Her grandmother's voice rose from memory, soft and sharp all at once. "Don't wait for the world to give you the mic, baby. Take it. Speak like your bones, remember what silence cost us." And suddenly, the words flowed. She didn't write a script. She wrote a testimony. The difference was everything. The hearing room was cavernous, cold, and too bright. Rows of suits lined the benches, attorneys, clerks, reporters, and power brokers. Cameras recorded everything. Every blink. Every breath. Maya took her seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the panel of federal investigators. When asked to state her name, she did so clearly. Then added, "I represent no one office, no political body, only the people whose truths were denied breath until now." She spoke for 27 minutes. She told them about Maya Williams, the maid-turned-mirror, about Andrew Parks and the zoning betrayals, about Anita Jackson and the library that forgot her name, about broken glass, slashed tires, and silence wrapped in legal threats. She didn't cry, but when she finished, half the room did. One of the lead investigators, a black woman in her 50s with gray streaks in her hair and steel in her eyes, leaned forward. "Miss Williams," she said, "do you believe justice is possible?" Maya looked around the room, then back at her. "I believe justice is a muscle. If we stop using it, it atrophies. But if we work it every day, in every room it grows, strong, relentless, and eventually undeniable." The woman nodded, and for the first time in that building, Maya felt heard, not just listened to. The press exploded. Echoes, movement spurs, federal probe. Maya Williams testifies on systemic suppression in the South. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up across 15 cities. Universities called to request Maya as a speaker. One network offered her a book deal, but she didn't flinch, because it was never about her. Back in Savannah, the movement picked up speed. Restoration grants were proposed in the city council. 2 officials quietly resigned. A third, publicly removed. Andrew Parks started a whistleblower support group. The wall that had held for decades was cracking. And through the cracks, sunlight poured in. A week later, Maya visited a small elementary school on the east side of Savannah. The principal, a young black woman named Shonda, had asked her to speak to a 4th-grade class learning about civil rights. Maya stood in front of them. No podium, no notes, just presence. "Do you know what an echo is?" she asked. One boy raised his hand. "It's when sound bounces back." She smiled. "Exactly. It's when something is spoken so clearly, so loudly, that it refuses to be forgotten." She looked around the room, at their wide eyes, their notebooks open. "I want you to remember that you are allowed to be loud. To ask questions, to take up space. Your truth deserves more than a whisper." One girl, her braids swinging as she wrote, looked up and said, "Miss Maya, are you famous?" Maya knelt down to her level. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm just someone who stopped waiting for permission." And the little girl smiled, because sometimes thunder starts as a whisper, and sometimes the bravest sound isn't a shout, it's the voice that keeps speaking even when the world tries to talk over it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Maya received the invitation, delivered in person by a courier wearing a dark blue suit and a white pin that read, "Office of the President." The letter was embossed, formal, almost unreal. She opened it at her kitchen table, James sitting across from her, silent, eyes wide. "Dear Miss Williams, in recognition of your unwavering commitment to truth, justice, and the strengthening of American democracy, you are cordially invited to attend the Presidential Civic Honor Roundtable at the White House. Your voice matters. Come take your seat at the table." Maya read it twice. Then she exhaled slowly, folded the letter, and said nothing for a long while. James reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "They see you now." "No," she said quietly. "They see all of us." "Do." The White House was quieter than she expected. Clean lines, guarded corridors, polite nods, and the hush of history vibrating through marble floors. Maya walked the hall in a dark green blazer borrowed, ironed with care, and her grandmother's brooch pinned firmly over her heart. Inside the Roosevelt room, a round table had been arranged figurative and literal. Leaders from different movements filled the chairs: voting rights advocates, environmental justice champions, healthcare reformers, educators, all of them warriors, all of them tired, all of them unyielding. The president walked in quietly, no fanfare. He shook hands, nodded to each guest, and then sat down. When his gaze landed on Maya, he smiled. "You've had quite a year, Miss Williams." Maya returned the smile but said nothing. She waited. She always waited until it mattered to speak. The conversation turned to policy, systemic reform, national memory. People shared statistics, plans, roadmaps. Maya listened, took notes, and when the president finally turned to her and asked, "What do you think is missing?" she lifted her chin. "Accountability," she said. "Real accountability. The kind that doesn't just fire people, it replaces them with those who understand the cost of silence. The kind that doesn't just apologize, but returns what was stolen. Equity is not charity. It's repair." The room stilled. The president gave a slow nod. "That's a hard truth." Maya didn't blink. So was everything that came before it. By the time she returned to Savannah, the sun was setting low over the river. Her phone buzzed endlessly: congratulations, press requests, more invitations. But Maya turned it off. Instead, she walked to the center. It had grown since its humble beginning. Now, it housed a media room, a legal aid wing, a youth leadership lab, and yet, the front doors still creaked the same way when she opened them. Inside, Aaliyah was waiting with a wide grin and a clipboard. "So," she said, "are you running for office yet?" Maya laughed. "Lord, no. I'm not trading one storm for another." "But you could," Aaliyah said seriously. "People would follow you." "I would." Maya paused, then smiled. "You don't need to follow me. You need to lead next." They walked down the hall together, passing walls lined with portraits not just Maya's, but those of speakers, volunteers, community elders. Under each picture was a quote, a testimony. Maya stopped in front of one frame, the mural of Anita Jackson, the former librarian who had shared her story in the very first public forum. Below the image were Anita's words, painted in gold: "If they didn't write us into the books, then we'll write the books ourselves." Weeks passed. The DOJ inquiry turned into a full investigation. Federal indictments were filed in Savannah and 2 other cities. A national task force was formed to audit zoning practices across the South. But more importantly, change took root where it mattered most: in hearts, minds, and local ballots. Andrew Parks was appointed to the city's Ethics Oversight Board. Anita Jackson was offered a ceremonial role with the Savannah Library Commission. Aaliyah was accepted into Spelman College with a full scholarship funded by a civic justice endowment created in Maya's name. And Maya? She kept working, not because she had to, but because the echo never really stopped it, simply found new places to land. One Sunday morning, she was invited to speak at Mount Calvary Baptist Church. She stood behind the pulpit, where generations had prayed, protested, and persevered. The sanctuary was filled to the rafters. She looked out, holding her notebook like always. But this time, she didn't open it. "Some people ask what I'm most proud of," she began. "Is it the court wins, the round tables, the recognition?" She let the silence stretch. "No. What I'm proudest of is that we kept showing up, even when the doors were locked, even when the lights were off. We showed up, with truth in one hand, and each other in the other." The crowd responded with soft amens and nods. "I was once laughed at in a room full of power. Because of my uniform, because of my skin, because I dared to exist, without apology." She pointed gently to the back row, where young girls in matching dresses leaned forward. "But you," she said, "you won't ask permission to speak. You'll know that your voice was never the problem. The silence was." Thunderous applause rose, not from noise, but from understanding. That night, Maya sat on her porch, the wind tugging gently at the edges of her notebook. She had written nothing, For once, it wasn't necessary. James brought her a glass of tea and sat beside her. They didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, James asked, "Do you think it'll last? All of this?" Maya thought for a moment, then said, "No change ever lasts if we stop tending to it." She looked out at the night sky, full of stars and unfinished prayers. "But maybe that's the point," she added. "We're not here to finish the work, just to carry it far enough that someone else can pick it up and keep going." James smiled. "You carried it well, Maya." She turned to him, eyes soft. "No, we did." And in that quiet, sacred moment, with the past behind her and the future unwritten, Maya Williams finally felt what she had fought for all along. Not justice, not fame, not even victory, but belonging, and sometimes that was the loudest echo of all.